The crystal chandeliers of Aurelia dripped light onto tables draped in white linen, each one a small island of calculated perfection. To Clara, waitressing here was like performing a ballet on a razor's edge. Every step, every gesture had to be flawless. Tonight the edge felt sharper than ever. Her mother's cough had been worse this morning, a dry, rattling sound that echoed the emptiness of their bank account. The specialist's appointment was next week, and the bill for it was already a monster lurking in the back of her mind. Her focus, however, was on table 7, specifically on the woman seated there, Beatrice Vanderbilt. She was a vision of cruel elegance, her silver hair styled into a severe but perfect coif, a diamond necklace glittering at her throat like a web of frozen stars. She had been tormenting Clara for the past hour, finding fault with everything from the temperature of the water to the fold of her napkin. Her son, Ethan, a handsome man in a tailored suit, sat opposite her, his expression a carefully neutral mask. He offered no help, no glance of sympathy. He was a silent accomplice to his mother's casual sadism. "This Châteauneuf-du-Pape," Beatrice said, her voice a low, cutting drawl as Clara approached with the bottle. "It's the 09, correct? Not that dreadful 11 you people tried to pass off last time." "Yes, Mrs. Vanderbilt, the 2009, Clara replied, her own voice a carefully modulated whisper. Her hands were steady as she presented the bottle, the label facing forward. Beatrice waved a dismissive hand adorned with heavy rings. "Proceed." Clara's heart hammered against her ribs. This was the moment. The wine was obscenely expensive, a single bottle costing more than her month's rent. She inserted the corkscrew with practiced precision, the soft pop of the cork a small sound in the hushed dining room. She poured a small amount into Ethan's glass for him to taste. He swirled it, sniffed, and gave a curt nod. His silence was, in its own way, as unnerving as his mother's constant criticism. Clara moved to Beatrice's side, her body angled just so, the bottle held firmly. She began to pour, a slow, steady stream of deep ruby liquid. And then it happened. Beatrice shifted in her seat, a sudden deliberate movement, her elbow jutting out and knocking Clara's arm. The world slowed. The red wine arced through the air, a scarlet ribbon against the pristine white of Beatrice's silk blouse. It splashed across the front of her, a violent stain on an immaculate canvas. A collective gasp rippled through the nearby tables. For a moment, there was only a stunned silence. Clara stood frozen, the bottle still in her hand, her mind blank with sheer panic. I'm so sorry," she stammered, her voice trembling. "I don't know how—" Beatrice looked down at her ruined blouse, then up at Clara. A slow, cold smile spread across her lips. It was a smile devoid of any warmth, a predator's smile. "You clumsy little fool," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the room. "Do you have any idea what this blouse costs? It's worth more than your entire pathetic life." Tears sprang to Clara's eyes, hot and immediate. It wasn't just the insult or the fear of losing her job, it was the weight of everything. The bills, her mother's illness, the sheer grinding effort of surviving each day, crashing down on her in this one mortifying moment. A sob escaped her lips, a choked, helpless sound, and Beatrice Vanderbilt laughed. It wasn't a chuckle. It was a full, throaty laugh, rich with contempt and satisfaction. She pointed a perfectly manicured finger at Clara. "Look at it, Ethan. It's crying. Over a bit of spilled wine and a dress. How utterly common." The laughter was the cruelest blow of all. It stripped away her last shred of dignity, leaving her exposed and humiliated in a room full of wealthy strangers. Their faces were a blur of pity and morbid curiosity. Clara's tears flowed freely now, silent streams of shame and despair. She could feel her world, so precariously balanced, shattering around her. Her manager, a stern man named Mr. Dubois, was already rushing over, his face a thundercloud. She knew, with a sickening certainty, that it was all over. Her job, her paycheck, her last hope of paying for her mother's care, all of it, gone, washed away in a splash of red wine and drowned in a torrent of cruel laughter. From a discreet corner table, an elderly woman with intelligent eyes and a quiet, powerful demeanor watched the entire scene unfold. She took a slow sip of her water, her gaze missing nothing. She saw the deliberate jut of Beatrice's elbow. She saw the genuine shock and horror on the young waitress's face, and she heard the laughter that echoed with a familiar chilling cruelty. Her expression hardened, a flicker of cold fire in her eyes. She carefully folded her napkin, placed it on the table, and made a decision. The termination was swift and brutal. Mr. Dubois didn't even let her finish her shift. He handed her a final paltry paycheck in a thin envelope and told her to collect her things from the staff locker room and leave through the back alley. "Aurelia has a reputation to maintain," he'd said, his voice cold and final. "We cannot have emotional displays on the dining floor. It's unseemly." Clara didn't argue. The fight had gone out of her, replaced by a hollow, aching numbness. She changed out of her uniform, the crisp black and white fabric now feeling like a costume from a life that was no longer hers. The alley behind the restaurant smelled of grease and discarded dreams. The city lights seemed harsh and unforgiving as she stepped out onto the street, pulling her thin coat tighter around her. The bus ride home was a blur. She stared out the window at the passing city, but saw only the sneering face of Beatrice Vanderbilt, heard only the echo of her laughter. How could someone be so casually cruel? How could a human being derive pleasure from another's pain? The injustice of it all was a physical weight in her chest, making it hard to breathe. Her apartment was small and stuffy, the air thick with the scent of boiled vegetables and the antiseptic her mother used. Maria, her mother, was asleep in the single bedroom, her breathing shallow and raspy. Clara looked at her frail form, the lines of worry etched deep into her face even in sleep, and a fresh wave of despair washed over her. The money from this job was their lifeline. Without it, the specialist was an impossible dream. The medications would run out, the rent would come due. She sank onto the lumpy sofa, the thin envelope from Mr. Dubois feeling like a feather in her hands, impossibly light against the crushing weight of her reality. She finally allowed herself to cry again, not the humiliated sobs of the restaurant, but deep, ragged gasps of pure fear. She cried for her mother, for their uncertain future, for the utter powerlessness of her situation. She was a ship with a hole in its hull, and the cold, dark water was rising fast. A soft knock at the door startled her. It was late. Who could possibly be visiting? Wiping her eyes on her sleeve, she hesitantly opened the door a crack. Standing in the dim hallway was the elderly woman from the corner table at Aurelia. She was dressed in a simple but exquisitely tailored tweed coat, her grey hair pulled back in an elegant bun. Her eyes, the same intelligent eyes that had watched the scene unfold, were filled with a calm, discerning sympathy. "Miss," the woman began, her voice gentle but firm. Clara Miller," she whispered, confused. "Miss Miller, I am Eleanor Vance. I was at the restaurant tonight. I saw what happened." Clara flinched, the shame returning. "Please, I don't want any trouble." "You are not the one in trouble, my dear," Eleanor said. She held out a pristine linen handkerchief. "I believe you might have need of this." Clara took it numbly. The fabric was soft and smelled faintly of lavender. It was a small, simple gesture of kindness, but in the vast ocean of her misery, it felt like a life raft. "That woman, Beatrice Vanderbilt, is a menace," Eleanor continued, her voice hardening slightly. "What she did to you was inexcusable. The way she laughed. Some people build their castles on the pain of others." She paused, her gaze steady and penetrating. "I want to help you." Clara shook her head, a bitter laugh escaping her. "Help me how? I've lost my job. I have no money, no connections. People like her. They always win. People like me, we just try to stay out of their way." "Not always," Eleanor said, a cryptic certainty in her tone. "Sometimes they trip over their own arrogance, and sometimes someone is there to make sure they fall." She reached into her handbag and pulled out a simple, elegant business card. It bore no company name, just a name, Arthur Davies, and a phone number. "This man is an associate of mine. He is very good at resolving difficult situations. Call him tomorrow. Tell him Eleanor Vance sent you and that you need to discuss the incident at Aurelia." Clara stared at the card. It felt heavy, important. "An associate? Is he a lawyer?" "I can't afford a lawyer." "Do not concern yourself with the cost," Eleanor said dismissively. "Consider it an investment in justice." What happened tonight was more than just a spilled glass of wine, Clara. It was a symptom of a disease, and I believe it's high time we found a cure." With a final reassuring nod, Eleanor Vance turned and walked away, her footsteps echoing softly in the quiet hallway. Clara stood in the doorway, clutching the linen handkerchief and the mysterious card, a tiny, fragile flicker of hope igniting in the cold darkness of her heart. It was a wild, impossible thought, but for the first time since that wine had arced through the air, she felt like she wasn't entirely alone. The next morning, Clara woke with the familiar knot of anxiety in her stomach, but it was accompanied by a new, uncertain current of possibility. She looked at the business card sitting on her small kitchen table. Arthur Davies. The name sounded formidable, expensive. Eleanor Vance's words echoed in her mind. "Do not concern yourself with the cost." It seemed too good to be true, a fairy tale for a world that had shown her only harsh realities. Her mother was awake, sipping weakly at a cup of tea. "Clara, mi amor, you're home early," Maria said, her voice raspy. Clara forced a smile. They let me go early last night. It was a slow evening." The lie tasted like ash in her mouth, but she couldn't bear to add to her mother's worries. "Not yet." After settling her mother back in bed with a book, Clara stared at the phone. Her hand trembled as she picked it up. What could she possibly say? "Hello, a rich woman I've never met gave me your card because another rich woman made me cry." It sounded insane. She was about to hang up when she thought of Beatrice's laugh. That sound of pure, unadulterated contempt. The memory stiffened her resolve. She dialed the number. A crisp, professional voice answered on the first ring. "Davies." Hello," Clara stammered. "My name is Clara Miller, Eleanor Vance. She told me to call you." There was a brief pause. Miss Miller, yes. Mrs. Vance informed me you would be in touch. She was quite insistent. Can you be at the offices of the Vance Foundation in 1 hour? A car is already on its way to your address." Clara was stunned into silence. The Vance Foundation. She knew the name. It was one of the largest philanthropic organizations in the country, a behemoth of old money and charitable works. A car. For her. Yes, of course, she managed to say. The car that arrived was a sleek black sedan with tinted windows, the kind she'd only ever seen in movies. The driver, a man in a neat suit, held the door for her with a polite nod. As they drove through the city, leaving her rundown neighborhood for the gleaming skyscrapers of the financial district, Clara felt as if she had stepped into an alternate reality. The Vance Foundation occupied the top 10 floors of a towering glass and steel building. The lobby was a cathedral of marble and quiet efficiency. A receptionist directed her to a private elevator which whisked her silently to the penthouse floor. The doors opened onto a reception area that was larger than her entire apartment, with panoramic views of the city. A man with sharp eyes and a perfectly tailored grey suit rose to greet her. "Miss Miller, I'm Arthur Davies." He had the air of a man who missed nothing and wasted no time. He led her not into a stuffy office, but into a comfortable, sunlit sitting room. And there, seated in an armchair by the window, was Eleanor Vance. "Clara, my dear, thank you for coming," Eleanor said, her smile warm but her eyes serious. "Please, sit." Clara sat on the edge of a plush sofa, feeling utterly out of place. "Mrs. Vance, I don't understand. The Vance Foundation, who are you?" Eleanor's smile became a little sad. "I am a woman who has, perhaps, allowed a problem to fester for too long. Beatrice Vanderbilt," she said, the name dropping like a stone into the quiet room, "is my daughter-in-law." The revelation hit Clara with the force of a physical blow. She stared, speechless. "My son Richard passed away 10 years ago," Eleanor explained, her voice softening with old grief. "He was a good man, but he was blind to Beatrice's true nature. He loved her, and for his sake I tolerated her. After he died, he left her a significant portion of his shares in the family trust, granting her a seat on several boards and a lifestyle to which she has become accustomed. But control, ultimate control, remained with me as the matriarch of this family and the head of this foundation." Arthur Davies stepped forward, picking up the narrative. "Mrs. Vanderbilt has been a liability for some time, Miss Miller. Her public behavior, her arrogance, her treatment of staff, contractors and business associates has reflected poorly on the Vance name. We have documented numerous incidents, but they have always been minor, private matters, disputes that could be settled quietly with money. What happened to you last night was different. It was public, Eleanor stated, her voice like ice. It was gratuitous. And she laughed, in front of my grandson, Ethan. She showed her true rotten core for all to see. And in doing so, she has given me the justification I have been waiting for. Clara's head was spinning. Justification for what? To remove her, Eleanor said simply. To cut the cancer out of this family. The Vance Family Trust has strict morality and public conduct clauses. A member bringing the family name into significant public disrepute can have their voting rights and their access to the trust's funds revoked by a majority decision of the board, a board which I chair. So the incident at the restaurant, Clara began to understand, is the catalyst, Davies finished for her. Your testimony, as a credible and sympathetic victim, is the key. But it's not just about what she did to you. We believe this is the tip of the iceberg. We believe Beatrice has been using the Vance name and resources for her own fraudulent schemes, hiding her activities behind the trust's reputation. What she did to you was an act of personal cruelty. What we suspect she has been doing to our family's legacy is an act of calculated treachery. Eleanor leaned forward, her eyes locking with Clara's. This is why I have brought you here. I am not offering you a simple handout, Clara. I am offering you a chance at justice, not just for you, but for everyone she has ever harmed. I need your help. I need you to be our star witness. I need you to tell your story. And in return, I promise you, Beatrice Vanderbilt will never harm anyone again. We are going to dismantle her world, piece by piece. And it all starts with the tears she so proudly laughed at. Clara looked from Eleanor's determined face to Arthur Davies's sharp, intelligent one. The fear was still there, a cold knot in her stomach, but now it was mixed with something else, a sense of purpose, a sense of power. She was no longer just a victim. She was a key, a weapon. And for the first time she believed that the woman who had tried to break her might just be the one who ended up broken. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of activity that felt more like a spy thriller than the life of an unemployed waitress. Arthur Davies and his team of forensic accountants and private investigators descended upon Beatrice Vanderbilt's life with the quiet, devastating efficiency of a special forces unit. Clara, to her own surprise, found herself at the center of their operations. Her first task was to provide a sworn, videotaped deposition. In a sterile conference room with only Davies and a stenographer present, she recounted the events at Aurelia. She spoke not with tears, but with a clear, steady voice, detailing every condescending remark, every dismissive gesture, and culminating in the deliberate shove and the cruel, echoing laughter. Davies listened intently, his expression unreadable, occasionally asking a pointed question that drew out another layer of Beatrice's malice. She called your life pathetic, correct? He asked. Yes, Clara confirmed. And her son, Ethan Vance, he was present for all of this. Yes, he never said a word. Did he seem uncomfortable, embarrassed? Anything? Clara thought for a moment. He seemed absent, like he had walled himself off from it. He just stared at his wine glass. Davies made a note. Indifference can be as damning as complicity, he murmured, more to himself than to her. But Clara's role quickly expanded beyond that of a simple witness. Davies explained that to truly build an unshakable case for the board, they needed a pattern of behavior. Beatrice's cruelty couldn't be seen as a one-off bad day. It had to be established as her character. People like Beatrice leave a trail of broken people, Davies explained, spreading a series of files across a large table in their temporary command center. Former maids, drivers, personal assistants, charity organizers she's stiffed, contractors she's refused to pay. They are all too scared to speak up. She uses the Vance name like a club to intimidate them into silence. But you, Miss Miller, you are different. You have Mrs. Vance, the true power behind that name, supporting you. They might talk to you. And so Clara began a new, surreal job. Accompanied by a discreet investigator named Frank, she started visiting people from Beatrice's past. Their first stop was a former personal assistant, a young woman named Sarah who now worked in a small bookstore. At first, Sarah was terrified, refusing to speak about her time with Mrs. Vanderbilt. "You don't understand," she whispered, constantly looking over her shoulder. "She threatened to ruin me. She said she'd make sure I never worked in this city again." Clara reached across the cafe table and gently touched her hand. "I do understand," she said softly. "She fired me and laughed in my face while I cried. I know what it feels like to be powerless against her. But things are different now. Eleanor Vance is involved. We can stop her, but we have to do it together." Seeing the genuine empathy in Clara's eyes and hearing the name Eleanor Vance, Sarah's wall of fear began to crack. She told them stories of being sent on impossible errands in the middle of the night, of being verbally abused for the slightest perceived mistake, of Beatrice deliberately withholding her final paycheck out of sheer spite. It was the same story over and over again. A landscaper who had his contract terminated and his invoices ignored after Beatrice decided she didn't like the color of the petunias he'd planted. A caterer for one of her lavish parties who was accused of stealing a silver fork and had his reputation smeared, only for the fork to turn up in Beatrice's own handbag a week later. Each story was a small, sharp piece of a mosaic that, when assembled, depicted a woman of profound and monstrous narcissism. Meanwhile, Davies's accountants were following the money. They operated out of a secure room filled with monitors displaying complex spreadsheets and financial charts. They discovered that Beatrice was running a shell company, a charity for the arts that was anything but. It's a classic wash and rinse cycle, a young, prodigiously smart accountant named Ben explained to Clara, pointing at a labyrinthine diagram on a screen. She solicits donations from her wealthy friends, promising them a tax write-off and a plaque on a gallery wall. The Vance Foundation matches a portion of these donations per the family trust's philanthropic mandate. Beatrice then uses the charity to purchase wildly overpriced, terrible art from a specific gallery. That gallery is owned by another shell company, which after 3 layers of obfuscation, we've traced back to a holding corporation registered in the Cayman Islands. And the sole director of that corporation? Beatrice Vanderbilt. "So she's stealing from her friends and from the Vance Foundation?" Clara asked, horrified. "Worse," Ben said, his eyes gleaming with professional outrage. "She's stealing from her dead husband's legacy. She's using the family's good name as a cover for her personal enrichment scheme. This isn't just immoral, it's wire fraud, mail fraud, and massive tax evasion. She's been siphoning millions for years." The investigation culminated in a discovery that tied everything together. Clara, recounting her story for the 10th time to help the legal team, remembered a small detail. When she was complaining about the wine, she mentioned something about a new property development. "The mess at Blackwood Manor," she called it. She was angry with Ethan about it, said he wasn't being aggressive enough with the zoning board. That small, overheard comment was the key that unlocked the biggest door. Davies's team investigated Blackwood Manor. It was a historic property that Beatrice was trying to get rezoned for luxury condominiums, a move fiercely opposed by local preservation societies. They dug deeper and found the source of the opposition's funding. An anonymous donor. With the resources of the Vance network, they unmasked the donor. It was a rival real estate mogul, a man named Marcus Thorne. And then they found the final damning piece, a series of encrypted emails between Beatrice and Thorne. She wasn't fighting him, she was colluding with him. Her public fight against him was a sham. She was intentionally sabotaging the Vance family's official real estate bid for the property, driving down its value so that Thorne's company could swoop in and buy it for a fraction of its worth. In return, Thorne was depositing a hefty consulting fee into her Cayman Islands account. She was actively betraying her own family for a payday. Arthur Davies leaned back in his chair, a thin, satisfied smile on his face. "We have her," he said, looking at Eleanor. "We have her on personal conduct. We have her on financial fraud, and now we have her on corporate espionage against her own family's interests. The case is ironclad." Eleanor Vance nodded slowly, her expression grim but resolute. "Then it is time to schedule a family meeting. At her house. I want to see her face when her world comes crashing down around her in the very monument she built to her own greed." The Vanderbilt mansion was a monument to ostentatious wealth, a sprawling neoclassical monstrosity of white marble and perfectly manicured lawns. It was designed to intimidate and impress. As Clara stepped out of the car with Eleanor and Arthur Davies, she felt a tremor of her old fear. This was Beatrice's domain, her fortress. A severe-looking butler led them through a cavernous foyer, their footsteps echoing on the polished floors. Portraits of stern-faced Vanderbilt ancestors, most of them purchased, not inherited, as Davies had dryly noted, stared down from the walls. They were shown into a grand drawing room, decorated in shades of cream and gold, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking an Olympic-sized swimming pool. Beatrice was seated on a gilded chaise lounge, a glass of champagne in her hand. Ethan stood by the fireplace, his expression as unreadable as ever. Beatrice didn't stand up. She simply gestured with her glass towards a set of chairs opposite her. "Eleanor," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness, "to what do I owe this unexpected committee meeting? And you've brought your little legal Rottweiler. And, oh my," she feigned surprise, her eyes landing on Clara. "It's the clumsy waitress. Are you here to apply for a job? I'm afraid we're fully staffed with people who can handle a tray." Clara flinched, but Eleanor placed a calming hand on her arm before stepping forward. "There will be no more games, Beatrice," Eleanor said, her voice quiet but carrying an immense weight that silenced the room. "We are here to discuss your formal and immediate removal from the Vance Family Trust and all associated boards." Beatrice's smirk faltered for a fraction of a second before she recovered, letting out a tinkling, condescending laugh. "On what grounds? Did the little waitress cry to you? Did I hurt her feelings? You can't touch my position. Richard's will is ironclad. Richard's will is contingent on the bylaws of the family trust," Arthur Davies interjected smoothly, stepping forward and placing a thick leather-bound folio on the ornate coffee table. "Bylaws which include, as you know, strict clauses regarding moral turpitude and actions which bring the Vance name into public disrepute. Your disgusting behavior towards Miss Miller at Aurelia was merely the final straw." He opened the folio. "Exhibit A, a sworn deposition from Miss Miller. We also have corroborating statements from 6 other members of the restaurant staff and 3 patrons who witnessed your performance." Beatrice waved a dismissive hand. "Hearsay and the whining of the lower classes." "It's meaningless." "Perhaps," Davies continued, unfazed, "but is this meaningless?" He slid a financial chart across the table. "This is a flow chart detailing the activities of the Vanderbilt Arts Endowment. It shows precisely how you have been soliciting donations, leveraging the Vance Foundation's matching funds, and funneling the money through a series of shell companies into your own offshore account. To date, we have tracked over $14 million. We have copies of every wire transfer. We have the incorporation papers from the Cayman Islands. We have you, Beatrice, on multiple counts of fraud and embezzlement." The color drained from Beatrice's face. She stared at the chart, her mouth slightly agape. Ethan took a step forward, his eyes wide with shock as he looked at the damning evidence. "And then," Eleanor said, her voice dropping to a near whisper, "there is the matter of Blackwood Manor." Davies slid another document across the table. It was a printout of an encrypted email. Beatrice's eyes darted to it, and a flicker of genuine panic entered them for the first time. "We have your entire correspondence with Marcus Thorne," Davies stated flatly. "We know you have been actively sabotaging the Vance real estate bid, feeding Thorne insider information to devalue the project, betraying this family for your own personal profit." Beatrice shot to her feet, her composure finally shattering. "Lies! These are all lies. Forgeries. You think you can come into my home and—" She turned on Clara, her face contorted with rage. "This is your fault. You little nobody. You came crawling to them with your pathetic tears and cooked up this fantasy." She lunged towards Clara, her hand raised as if to strike her, but Eleanor moved with a speed that belied her age. She stepped between them, her body a rigid barrier. "You will not touch her," Eleanor commanded, her voice ringing with absolute authority. Beatrice stumbled back, sputtering. She looked at her son, her eyes pleading. "Ethan, are you going to let them do this? Say something." Ethan looked from the evidence on the table to his grandmother's stony face, and then to his mother's desperate one. He seemed to shrink under the weight of the moment. "Mother, is it true?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "The charity, Blackwood Manor. Did you do it?" "Of course not," Beatrice shrieked. "They're trying to poison you against me." She sank back onto the chaise lounge, trying to regain some semblance of her former arrogance. She picked up her champagne, her hand trembling slightly. She looked at Clara, a venomous sneer returning to her face. "This is all a ridiculous farce. You have nothing." That was when it happened. Eleanor, her face a mask of cold, righteous fury, looked at the arrogant woman lounging on the chair, sneering at the young woman whose life she had almost ruined. The casual, unrepentant cruelty was too much. In one swift, shocking motion, Eleanor strode forward and kicked the leg of the delicate, gilded chair Beatrice was sitting on. The chair wasn't kicked over, but it skidded sideways with a sharp crack, jolting Beatrice violently. Champagne sloshed down the front of her expensive dress. She cried out, a mix of shock and indignation, scrambling to regain her balance. The image was a stunning reversal of the scene at the restaurant, the powerful, composed woman now disheveled and caught off guard. Eleanor Vance stood over her, her eyes blazing. "You laughed at her tears." Eleanor's voice was low and shaking with controlled rage. "You sat in your bubble of privilege and laughed at the pain of a good person trying to survive. You felt powerful, didn't you? Tearing down someone who had nothing. Well, look at you now, Beatrice. You are a fraud, a thief, a traitor to your own family. You have nothing but the clothes on your back and the lies you've built your life on. And I am about to take it all away. Every last penny, every last painting, this very house. You wanted a show, you've got one. The whole world is about to watch your pathetic life come crashing down, and I promise you, everyone will be laughing." The room was utterly silent, save for Beatrice's ragged breathing. The snob who had laughed at Clara's tears was finally face to face with her own ruin. The aftermath was not a single explosion, but a controlled demolition of Beatrice Vanderbilt's entire existence. Eleanor Vance and Arthur Davies moved with surgical precision. The first step was the emergency board meeting of the Vance Family Trust. Armed with the irrefutable evidence of financial fraud and corporate sabotage, Eleanor called for a vote. Ethan, pale and grim-faced, abstained, a move that was as good as a vote against his mother. The motion to invoke the morality clause and strip Beatrice of her rights, her board seats, and her access to all trust funds passed unanimously. The news hit the financial world like a thunderclap. The Vance family, known for its discretion, had publicly excommunicated one of its own. The official statement was terse, citing gross financial misconduct and actions detrimental to the family's interests. The society columns, which had once fawned over Beatrice's every party and fashion choice, now feasted on her downfall with ravenous glee. Simultaneously, Arthur Davies delivered a copy of their entire investigation to the district attorney's office. The evidence of fraud, embezzlement, and tax evasion was so thoroughly compiled that an indictment was issued within a week. Federal agents arrived at the white marble mansion one morning, their cars blocking the long, curved driveway. They didn't knock. They presented a warrant, and the process of seizing assets began. Clara watched the news reports on a small television in the temporary corporate apartment Eleanor had arranged for her. She saw footage of men in blue jackets carrying art from the walls of the mansion, of luxury cars being towed away. Beatrice was filmed leaving the house, a coat thrown over her head to hide from the swarm of cameras, her face a mask of fury and humiliation. The woman who had looked down on the entire world was now a public spectacle, a fallen queen with no kingdom left. Her assets were frozen. Her credit cards were declined. The friends who had once flocked to her lavish parties now refused to take her calls. The Vanderbilt name, which she had wielded like a weapon, was now an anchor dragging her to the bottom. She was forced to move into a small rented apartment, a place she would have sneered at only months before. The legal fees mounted, eating away at the last of her personal, non-Vance-related funds. Eleanor Vance was true to her word. The $14 million recovered from Beatrice's fraudulent charity was funneled directly back into the Vance Foundation. Eleanor then established a special fund within the foundation, the Second Chance Grant. Its purpose was to provide aid and compensation to individuals who had been victimized by the wealthy and powerful. People like the landscaper Beatrice had refused to pay, the caterer whose reputation she had smeared, and the assistant she had cheated out of a final paycheck. Clara, working alongside one of the foundation's administrators, helped track them down. One by one, they came forward, timidly at first, then with growing confidence. They received checks that not only covered their original losses, but also compensated them for their trouble. For Clara, seeing the relief and vindication on their faces was more satisfying than any news report about Beatrice's ruin. It wasn't just about punishment, it was about restoration. The crown jewel of the seizure was the mansion itself. After the legal proceedings were complete, ownership reverted to the Vance estate. Eleanor, in a move of symbolic genius, announced that the property would be donated. The grand, cold monument to greed was to be transformed into the new home of the city's most respected women's shelter, providing a safe haven for those fleeing abuse and starting their lives over. The ballroom where Beatrice had held her exclusive parties would become a job training center. The pristine lawns would become a playground for children. Clara stood with Eleanor on that lawn on the day of the dedication ceremony. The Vanderbilt name had been scrubbed from the gates. Instead, a simple, elegant sign read, Haven House. She built it to keep people out, Eleanor said, watching children laugh and play where statues once stood. Now, its purpose is to welcome people in. A far better use for marble and stone, don't you think? Clara nodded, a lump in her throat. The scale of the change was breathtaking. It was a complete inversion of Beatrice's world, a transformation of her legacy of cruelty into one of kindness. The seizure of her fortune wasn't just a legal maneuver, it was a profound act of poetic justice. With the storm of Beatrice's downfall having passed, a quiet new reality settled in for Clara. The first and most important change was her mother's health. Eleanor had insisted on having Maria seen by the best pulmonary specialist in the country. The diagnosis was serious, but with the right treatments Clara could never have afforded, her prognosis was excellent. For the first time in years, Clara saw genuine, hopeful color in her mother's cheeks. The constant, crushing weight of worry that had been her companion for so long finally began to lift. Eleanor had made it clear that Clara would be financially secure. A significant sum had been placed in a trust for her, compensation for the damages and her role in the investigation. But both women knew that a simple payout wasn't the answer. Clara wasn't looking for a handout, she was looking for a life. One afternoon, Eleanor summoned her to the sunlit sitting room in the Vance Foundation penthouse. "I have been thinking about your future, Clara," Eleanor said, getting straight to the point. "You have shown remarkable strength, integrity, and a deep well of empathy. These are qualities I value above all others. Tell me, if money were no object, what would you want to do?" Clara was taken aback. No one had ever asked her that question. Her dreams had always been small, practical, constrained by the walls of her circumstances, but now, given the freedom to imagine, an old forgotten passion surfaced. I've always loved to cook," she admitted, almost shyly. "My mother taught me. Not fancy food, like at Aurelia, just good food. Food that makes people feel welcome and cared for. I always dreamed of having a small place, a little bistro, where people could come and feel at home." A slow, genuine smile spread across Eleanor's face. "I had a feeling you would say something like that. You are a nurturer, Clara. It's in your soul. At Aurelia, you were serving food. But your dream is to serve people." And so a new project began. With funding from the Vance Foundation's Small Business Incubation Program, another of Eleanor's initiatives, and with Clara's own compensation as seed money, the dream started to take shape. Clara threw herself into the work with a passion she hadn't felt in years. She found a perfect location in a cozy neighborhood, a corner spot with big windows that let in the morning light. She didn't want it to be like Aurelia, a cold temple of haute cuisine. She wanted it to be warm, inviting, a place with mismatched wooden chairs, fresh flowers on every table, and the scent of baking bread in the air. She named it The Humble Plate. The work was hard, but it was joyful. She was involved in every decision, from the color of the paint on the walls to the design of the menu. She hired staff not based on their resumes, but on their kindness and their passion for service. Her first employee was Sarah, the former assistant to Beatrice, who turned out to have a brilliant mind for management. On the opening night, the little bistro was packed. Friends, people from the neighborhood, and many of the other individuals who had been helped by the second chance grant came to show their support. Eleanor Vance sat at a quiet corner table, watching the scene with a proud maternal gaze. Clara, wearing a simple white apron over her dress, moved through the room, her face glowing with a happiness so profound it was almost luminous. She wasn't just a waitress anymore. She wasn't a victim. She was the heart of this warm, bustling place she had built from the ashes of her old life. Late in the evening, a solitary figure appeared in the doorway. It was Ethan Vance. He looked thinner, the carefully neutral mask he once wore replaced by an expression of deep weariness and regret. He stood awkwardly by the door until Clara noticed him. She approached him, her heart giving a little flutter of apprehension. "Ethan," she said, her voice even. "Clara," he replied, I know I have no right to be here, but I wanted to see it, and I wanted to say, I'm sorry for what my mother did and for what I didn't do. I sat there and I did nothing. That silence is the great shame of my life, and I will carry it always." Clara looked at him, at the genuine remorse in his eyes. She thought of the frightened, powerless woman she had been, and the confident, happy woman she was now. Forgiveness wasn't about him. It was about her. "Thank you for saying that," she said simply. "Would you like a table?" He looked surprised, then gave a small, grateful smile. "I'd like that very much." As Clara led him to a small table near the window, she caught Eleanor's eye across the room. The older woman gave her a subtle, approving nod. Clara knew this wasn't a fairy tale ending. It was something better. It was real. It was a new beginning, one she had earned not through magic or luck, but through her own resilience, her own integrity, and the unexpected kindness of a woman who understood that the best way to fight darkness is to build something beautiful and bright in its place. The laughter that had once sought to destroy her had, in the end, been the catalyst for a life more wonderful than she had ever dared to imagine.